Well, good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Eduardo.
Peter Malakoff in Mexico at Reither in California. And I contacted Peter, and I'm speaking to the audience now, because we spoke a while back. And recently I was contacted by a number of people who wanted us to re-engage the conversation we had in the past about your practice in Ayurvedic medicine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if I may take a moment here, I want to read a couple of the comments to get oriented to today's
Great.
conversation. So one comment we had from the last talk would be incredible to receive Ayurvedic teachings in the next interview. Please make it happen soon. Thank you for this enchanting talk. That's a comment from the last interview we had, and here's another one. Thanks, Ed. By the way, my attention span for exceptional talks like this can go on for well over an hour. I'm sure others feel the same. And I won't go on because there's a number of comments, but lastly, my attention span for exceptional talks like this can go well. Please have another one soon. Sweet talk that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I also felt the same way, that because of your knowledge, your interest, your experience, and your background in many different disciplines, you add so much to the science, the art of Ayurvedic medicine. So considering the time today, and I'm back in California now, and I'm hearing so much about long-term COVID and blah, blah, blah. It's like, wow, we still have this plague going on today. So I thought you'd kind of talk to the audience again about how you're seeing the time today. I think I would like to start with the time of this planet, this moment where I'm hearing all over. I mean, I just came from Massachusetts. I've been all over the United States. There seems to be a plague going on, not just in many different areas.
Well, in Sanskrit, the god of time, or time, is Kala. You ever seen in Tibet? Well, we weren't in Tibet, we were in Ladakh. When you go into these ancient monasteries, I mean, really ancient, to the right of the entry of any and every monastery is a big painting of the wheel of life. You ever seen that?
Yeah.
So that wheel of life is being held by this big demon. That demon is time.
Lord Yama, I believe in the Buddhist Tanka, right? The wheel of life.
It varies. So that everything is held in the wheel of time. Everything is held in time itself. And so I just finished doing a seminar here in Mexico on Ayurveda and aging. Aging, which is all about time, when time enters in. Aging was one of the three, when Buddha looked at life, he said there's basically what leaves me unsatisfied is old age, disease, and death. Those were the three, wounds to life. And he didn't call them wounds. But old age is based on time. It's an inevitable, inescapable factor. How that leads into Ayurveda is that in Ayurveda, everything is based on universal principles and absolutely individualized, relevant to time, person, place, season, time of day, everything, or dosha. A lot of people have heard of dosha in Ayurveda. Dosha refers to the different elemental compositions of any particular person or thing in terms of its effect on the person. That's what a dosha is. The 5 elements that make up everything in creation, they're called the pancha, that's 5, mahabhutas, the great elements, the 5 great elements, in differing combinations are what make up the doshas in a person.
So the elements make up the doshas? That's the subset of doshas?
Everything in creation, everything, every place, every time, every elevation, every location on earth, every season, everything altogether is made up of different, ever-changing combinations of the 5 elements. Everything. That's the Vedic basis of Ayurveda. Everything.
And the elements of the fire, air, water.
Those 5 elements are ether, that's like space. And then air, that's movement in space. Then there's fire, where there's movement, there's friction. So ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Everything. So when you have a predominance of any, usually at least 2 of these elements, that is what is called the dosha. Dosha in Sanskrit also means air, but it's, in other words, this is how you're screwed up, but it's also how you're blessed. Right. Every single thing has a blessing, and every single dosha has a blessing, and every single dosha has a curse. And exactly where the blessing is exactly where the curse is. Let me give you an example. Let's take the Vata dosha. Vata dosha is when a person or a thing has a predominance of the air and ether element. So because let's talk, a good example would be, let's take a person. Audrey Hepburn is an excellent example of a predominance of the air and ether elements in a person by birth. Small-breasted, very quick, small-boned, suffered from constipation all her life, died from complications of constipation. Very common when you see these really thin models walking the runway. My bet is that most of them are constipated. This is something that Vata and Vata people tend to suffer from. Almost all of them. There's certainly many exceptions. And so that would be a Vata, a predominance of the air and ether elements. I mean, she has all 5, just like all of us have all 5, but in predominance, not just in her physical by birth, her physicality by birth, but also in her physicality or disease symptoms as she lived her life. Now let's take an example of another dosha. So we have Vata dosha, Audrey Hepburn. Now let's take Pitta dosha, that's fire element predominant. A good example there, let's stick with women here, is Meryl Streep. That's a predominance of the fire element in a person. Reddish type hair, blondish reddish type hair, more or less shapely, more towards less so much emphasis on being thin, but being more medium, the Pitta dosha. Fiery, very adept intellectually, tending towards that, this fire element. I happen to be a high Pitta dosha. And
does it fit to the personality, meaning like an angry person?
Absolutely. There's usually, not always, there's usually a correlation between what a person is physiologically and psychologically. You see that in the animal kingdom all the time. You don't see elephants running, or dancing. Of course you can see, but the way that an elephant would dance is very different than the way, for instance, a dog would dance, or, what we would call dancing. So that would be when the Pitta or the fire element predominates in a person, again, or a thing, or a medicine, or a season, in anything. But that would be called Pitta dosha. So we have Vata dosha, Audrey Hepburn, and we have Pitta dosha, Meryl Streep. And then let's take Oprah Winfrey. Big bone, big breasted, big, big hair. Everything is like big, smooth. That would be a predominance of the earth and water elements. See, whereas, for instance, of Vata dosha, Audrey Hepburn, air and ether, very, very, very easy to change. When you want to change the temperature in a room, the air and ether elements, that's pretty simple to do. But if you want to change the temperature of the walls and the ceiling and the floor, that's difficult to change. The blessing of what Oprah Winfrey has is she's stable. She tends to be very consistent, stable, earth and water. It's hard to change. The curse for Oprah Winfrey, it's hard to change. It's very difficult for her to lose weight. Whereas for Audrey Hepburn, the wind, because it's air and ether predominance, it's much, much more easy to change. So when Vatas come to me for a consultation in Ayurveda, they usually come in with a big bag of medical, vitamins and minerals and supplements and this and that. It's almost always because they're always blown about. They don't know enough about their own constitution to know what to do to ground them.
So could I change the...
One more. The Ayurvedic approach to each of these elemental predominances is that opposites decrease one another and similars increase one another. So if you take somebody like Audrey Hepburn, who will have a natural attraction to raw foods, fruit, and things like that, most vatas or light foods, she needs heavy grounding foods to create balance. Whereas Oprah Winfrey, it's just the opposite. Whereas Audrey Hepburn, her early years of life were more easy for her. Why? Because when you have a vata in the kapha years, when a young person, boy or girl, or a girl before she starts to have her period, and a young boy as well, they don't have their period. They are balanced by the kapha years of life. But Audrey Hepburn would have a very difficult time, or more difficult time, when she gets into the vata season of life, when her period stops. The first years before her period are kapha, then the hormonal years when she's having her period are ruled by pitta, and then Ayurveda and aging, this course I taught, aging, when you get to a certain age, when women go through perimenopause and menopause, they enter into their vata years of life. And so when you have a vata like Audrey Hepburn entering into the vata season of life, that's very difficult because it creates too much vata. It does that for everybody. That's what aging is. That's what gray hair is. That's what lines in the face are. This is everything. Vata qualities of vata are dry, hard, rough, light, changing, mobile. Vata is the only dosha that has legs. Pitta and kapha, they don't have legs. It's sort of like pitta and kapha might want to rob a bank, but they need vata to do the driving, get them there and get them away. That's why in the texts such as the Charak Samhita, one of the three main Bibles, I'm using that word, texts of Ayurveda, most of it is given over to vata dosha. So you have, in people, you have vata dosha, Audrey Hepburn, pitta dosha, Meryl Streep, and kapha dosha, Oprah Winfrey. And when you come to an Ayurvedic practitioner, like myself, and somebody comes to a consultation, I don't care what your dosha is, what you were born with. That's because I never cared, never will. No, it's not like that. Because what you're born with, you can't change. So what can you do about it? You can't change what you were born with. What you can change, And that's called your prakriti, what you were born with. But the Ayurvedic practitioner deals with vikruti, what you can change. And that's where the disease, what we call disease or imbalance, happens in the vikruti. So you can't change what you were born with, but you can change what's going on now through food, exercise, timing, all the different things that you can do to change or to create balance or health. Balance.
But as you're pointing to is that as you grow and change and reach your primary maturity and then you decline, but your doshas and your elements are also changing. So you would meet somebody at 35 differently than you would meet somebody at 65, right?
Yes.
Right.
So me and you, how old are you, Ed?
79.
So you're older than me. I'm 73. So aging will happen to all of us. Aging is an increase of the vata dosha. So in other words, the secret to make aging more balanced, less disruptive, less harmful to health is to balance, in almost every case, vata dosha. Now, of course, if you come into it as a vata dosha like Audrey Hepburn, it's even more difficult to balance.
And so people would come to you with different needs because of their particular different doshas and whatever they're going through, right?
Well, you can take, for instance, let's take a very common thing that happens to people as they age, insomnia. They don't sleep like they used to. Now, when you come to an Ayurvedic practitioner and you say, I have insomnia, that's not enough information for me. What type of insomnia? Do you have an insomnia that it's difficult for you to fall asleep? Or do you have an insomnia that you can fall asleep, but then you wake up around 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and you can't get back to sleep? That first inability to go to sleep is what they call a pitta type insomnia. With that going to sleep but waking up between 2 and 6, which by the way is the vata hours, is called a vata insomnia. So the approach is not like Western medicine, oh, insomnia. It's, well, what dosha, what elemental qualities are imbalanced in this person having insomnia versus that person having insomnia?
Do these doshas relate to specific organs in the body?
Of course. For instance, I talked about Audrey Hepburn, constipation. Vata rules or has its home in the lower intestine. Okay, and so when there's a drying up there, one of the qualities, they're called the gunas of qualities of vata dosha, is dry, hard, rough, constipation. When you have, for instance, people who have diarrhea, I lived in India for over 10 years. You're almost always, I can't think of an exception, dealing with pitta dosha, too much fire. The fire element has moved down to where it shouldn't be, into the vata dosha. Vata is cold, pitta is hot. And when that, through acidity, through indigestion, through wrong food, when pitta dosha, for one reason or another, moves down into the lower intestine and irritates that intestine with too much fire or heat, then the intestine goes, I ain't absorbing any of this shit. I ain't taking this shit. And it's passed out without absorption, without the moisture being taken out of it. And that's what we call diarrhea. You keep persisting in the causation of that, and you can get, all sorts of itis, colitis, all those itises or inflammatory conditions. It can get worse, more than just diarrhea.
Does the environment, like if you lived in Arizona versus if you lived in Hawaii in a moist area or a dry area?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For instance, when I lived in India, I had houses in South India where I'd spend the winter 4 months, and a house in the Himalayas where I would spend 8 months of the year at around 8,000 feet. Beautiful. Why? I mean, I was living around the Ramana Maharshi ashram. Why? Because it was just outrageously hot for me. I mean, I would give my consultations, I had to lay on the floor. But seriously, I mean, lay on a wet sheet and lay on the floor. It was too much for me as a pitta person, you see, to adapt to that comfortably. It was very difficult. So when you take someplace like Hawaii, for instance, in Hawaii, you cut a fruit in Hawaii, any fruit, cut it, water will run out of it. Now, what grows in the deserts of Saudi Arabia? You know, not watery fruits, dates. You cut a date, no water runs out of it. It's because it's dry there. You need to be able to conserve the fruits. The foods that actually grow in the different areas of the world support the beings, the animals, the humans that live in those
parts. But that date is as sweet as any of the fruit that comes in Hawaii.
But no water runs out of it. This is just an example. You don't see, for instance, in Alaska, heart disease was unknown 100 years ago, 50, when white people first started going up there and exploring and testing. But
even with all that whale fat and blubber.
Not at all, almost exclusive. They didn't have like, well, we're going to go corn. They ate on an all meat diet and they were fine. But now all of a sudden their health is, particularly bad. Why? Because they can get watermelon in wintertime. Whole Foods will give it to you. Sugar has come up there, which is sort of the universal poison of the world because it's so imbalancing. There's nothing inherently wrong with sugar. So yes, the different places on the face of the earth have different doshic qualities, each of which needs to be balanced. And primarily that balance is accomplished through food.
Can I ask you a little bit about personal relationships in terms of doshas and elements and these kinds of things? Same if you married somebody who's of a different dosha quality?
So opposites balance one another. If we lived in India 20 years ago, I mean, much more 20 years ago, much more even 50 years ago, and you had a son and I had a daughter, and we thought, they would be good if they got married together. We would go to an astrologer, a Vedic astrologer, a Jyotisha it was called, and they would compare your daughter, whoever's going to have the daughter and the son, compare the two charts. And they would say, this is a good opposition here. It's a good balance. Not that they're both the same, but that they balance each other. Not just man and woman, which also balance one another, but doshically. For instance, if you have two kaphas marry one another, they sit around on the sofa and eat chips, watch TV. If you have two vatas, then marry, this is how it could go wrong. It's not like it necessarily has to, but there's a tendency. It's too much kapha. There's not balance. That balance, again, is sama. Sama means balance. That's the samadhi. When we talk about samadhi, samadhi is vision, and sama is balance. So samadhi means you're neither looking inside, nor are you looking outside. Your vision is balanced. That's samadhi. So you're always looking for sama in Ayurveda. And the sama is by knowing the qualities of the 5 elements and how to balance them through food, lifestyle, place where you live. For instance, don't take Peter Malakoff and stick him down in South India in the summer. It didn't work. It was just too much for me. I could live there, but I lived inside. I had air conditioning all the time.
So let me ask you about, you've been practicing in India. You practice, I think, in the United States. You also are now practicing in Mexico. Do you find people coming to you with certain environmental or certain kinds of qualities of imbalances based on the geographical locations that are different?
For instance, there was a heck of a lot of diarrhea in India amongst the white people there that I saw. here I'm in Ajijic, Mexico, which is the largest gringo retirement village in the world, supposedly. So what I'm dealing with predominantly with people who come to me is excess vata. That's why I did that course, that seminar on Ayurveda and aging. People are, it's all very much colored by vata. Always, always, always with the older people that come to me.
So what are the conditions that would
Now, for instance, there's a heck of a lot of arthritis. For instance, there's a heck of a lot of constipation. For instance, there's a heck of a lot of insomnia. You see, but you get people who, is it a pitta insomnia or a vata insomnia? The approach, the way to attain balance is different for those two people. And Western medicine doesn't deal with it. It's as if you went to a shoe store and you say, I need a pair of shoes. And they give you, what size are you? Are you going to use the shoes for hiking? Or is it around the house? See, there's no individualization. There's no understanding of the uniqueness of this disease, although the names are shared in Western medicine, but it can have different doshic imbalances that account for what Western medicine calls the very same disease.
So when you do diagnose or come up with these kinds of problems from people, how do you remedy them? What are the medicines that you use in Ayurveda to remediate some of these conditions and imbalances? What are you herbs or
well, let me, first of all, a lot of people call it Ayurvedic medicine. It's not Ayurvedic medicine, it's Ayurveda. Ayurveda means Ayu is life, and Veda means the knowledge of life. Now, you see, Western, we think in terms of health, or you go to a doctor, what medicine are you going to give me? See, in Ayurveda, the chief predominant medicine is vidya, is knowledge.
Ah.
But it's not just knowledge.
Right.
That's like one wing of the bird, but that knowledge has to be applied. Okay, and the knowledge covers every aspect of life. That's why there's Jyotish, there's Vastu, the science of placement and orientation in life. There's all these different aspects in which that knowledge, that principle can be applied, the Ayurveda. So it's not Ayurvedic medicine. Now, on the other hand, there's a tremendous amount of Ayurvedic herbs. Herbs, I remember when I went to Kalidas Sanskrit University in India, and I remember asking the professor, what's the difference between what we call medicine or herbs and food? Is there a difference? Mm. And he said, well, he says, food nourishes the tissues. Medicine either enhances that nourishment or decreases that nourishment, or it's also can be used to, for instance, eliminate pain. I've been using this. I've become known around here. I mean, I joke with it, but there's this powder called Nawarn Churna I learned about in India, and it's like this universal, without side effects, pain medicine, Nawarn Churna, that for certain kinds of pain, but muscular pain, you see, I live in a place where there's a lot of old people, and they walk out, there's a big 50-mile long lake here in the huge Malakoff, and I see people, limping or this or that, and I talk and give them this medicine, and it's like, he's the drug dealer. It's not illegal in any way, but it's Nawarn Churna. But I always tell them, what's the cause? Yes, there's this Nawarn Churna, which is fabulous for removing pain. Fabulous, certain kinds of pain. But what is the cause of your pain in the first place? That's what Ayurveda is predominantly focused on. Is there a tremendous, ancient, wondrous pharmacopoeia, herbs, and just incredible. I mean, they've had, 10,000 more years at least to develop it. But so the primary balancer would be food. In my experience with predominantly gringos, white people, America, Western Europe, the predominant cause, not the exclusive cause, but the predominant cause is what people are eating every day, how they're digesting that food every day. And that's what, whether it's balancing or imbalancing, leads to anything from premature aging to health. You know, in other words, and in between a whole range of diseases. Why do some people get this disease and some people get that disease? If you take a chain and you hook it to a movable boulder, and then you pull it with a incredible force, that chain will eventually break, and it breaks exactly at its weakest link. That weakest link, everybody, according to their dosha and their genetic inheritance and their experience in life, has this or that weakest link. And that's where the break will occur. You know, and that's what explains why do people get sick differently at different times, in different ways, in different organs, like that.
Wow. Well, that really gets quite. I'm familiar with that medicine of that you're speaking about because a mutual friend of ours gave it to many people that we know, and
Oh, right.
they think it's the
Yeah.
best since sliced
I gave it to that guy. I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, no, it's incredible. But you see, again, the focus is not like, wow, look at this medicine. The focus is on the video. How did you, what aberration in your actions, based on an aberration usually in your thinking and your feeling, led to that in the first place? That's what has to change. There's no, you know, there's no magical medicine that will make you live forever. So the focus quickly gets lost in the West because of Western medicine. Ayurveda is the mother of Western medicine.
Ayurveda is the mother of Western medicine?
Yeah, I'm going to trace it. I'm going to give you a 5-minute less trace of how that happened. India, home of Ayurveda, had a lot of trade with Persia and also a lot of trade with Greece. You know, this is in ancient times. And Buddhist monks, Buddha, by the way, practiced Ayurveda. Buddha, by the way, had excess pitta. Buddha, by the way, was given by King Bimbisara, who was the big Raja of his day in Buddha's area. He wanted to give Buddha some gift. And he's, what can I give him? And he gave him his Ayurvedic practitioner, who was named Jivaka. There's a whole story about Jivaka. But he gave him his Ayurvedic physician, who was named Jivaka. He was the greatest Ayurvedic physician of his time. And so many people came to join the Buddha Sangha because free healthcare from Jivaka. That the early Buddhists made it a rule that if you were sick, you couldn't join the Sangha. That's where that came from. So the wisdom of Ayurveda was transmitted via trade, via Buddhist monks, into not just into Japan, China, but also into Persia and eventually to Greece. And that's where you get Hippocrates, who also had the 3 doshas, you know, I forget what they're called, the humors. He called them the humors. That's what, see, when people translate that, they don't know what they're translating. Oh, I meant this, I meant that, but they don't get the whole system. But that was Ayurveda. Let thy food be thy medicine. See, in other words, all the Greek medicine was oriented towards creating health, not just by removing symptoms or suppressing them, like even with Noir and Sherman, but towards creating health. For instance, every single Greek medical establishment was located directly next to one of the great amphitheaters, because they felt that to see theater, particularly tragedy, was healing. because it opened one's self up to humility in the face of the varieties of experience that can happen to one in life, in spite of your noble efforts to change them. They felt tragedy was extraordinarily healing. But they always saw, and so Hippocrates, which modern day doctors used to take the Hippocratic Oath, was all based on the humors, which was based on Ayurveda. That's where that came from. Hippocrates also said no man should be a physician if he doesn't know astrology. Another means of diagnosis that goes out, like for instance, whereas I will do somebody's pulse, look at their tongue, and observe their facial features, their body, their walk, the way they talk, all these kind of things, all come into the consideration. Oh, shit, Ed, what was I talking about?
Oh, well, you're talking about the origins of Western medicine being Ayurveda.
Yeah, thank you. This is how age hits me. I hope
but it's such rich history that you're revealing. And
well, there's so much pressing on me. My experience is that there's so much I want to say, and I have to funnel it, and then I over squeeze. So I was talking about Hippocrates, who said that no man should be a doctor. No, there should be no doctor because he didn't know Jyotish. Jyotish, I know ours. Whereas I will primarily do pulse or bodily diagnosis and tongue. Jyotish can look out beyond the moment, out over the mountains of the moment, and see deeply into the past and also tendencies into the future, strong or very light. There's always free will, but there's also fate. I could throw a rock, I could hurt somebody. There's a tendency, the law, Gandhi said God created the law of karma and then he retired. There's a law that rock will come back and hit me. But based on one's actions in this life, what was a rock being thrown and hitting somebody in the head, through right actions in this life, can turn into a leaf falling off the tree, hitting me. In other words, there's karma, but there's also action.
Well, what you're referring to now, because I'm so psychologically oriented, is that how do these doshas work with what's called the mind or the thinking person in terms of what you're just referring to in terms of qualities of the body, but now the qualities of the personality or the mind, or how a person goes about and lives his or her life? I mean, these qualities of elements.
They're reflected. The 5 elements are reflected. For instance, Othello in Shakespeare. He's always this big guy. You don't see like Iago, the guy who, the screamer, is very thin, always in all the plays. There's a recognition that, this corpulence, one of the curses of very full, obese people is they can be incredibly jealous. This is a kapha quality. One of the curses of these qualities, you always show like a really rich person, like Jabba the Hutt, in the Star Wars, big, fat, they accumulate. They just, that's their, so often, almost always, when I say a kapha, their orientation needs to be more towards elimination. Whereas when you see a vata person comes to see me, they need to be able to assimilate more, to hold more, not just to take in, but to hold it. So there's a definite correlation between dosha in the body and dosha in the mind. Pitta types tend to get angry. That doesn't mean that every pitta is going around raging. But unless that's where the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas enter in. You've heard of these, or should I?
Yeah, now you're throwing another element of different.
I didn't mean to do it, but here it goes. That there's not just the 3 doshas. In the Indian tradition, like when you read the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna is out on the battlefield, And he's like, damn, I don't want to kill people who I'm related to. There's good people on the other side who are there because they have to be, they have obligations to this evil character. I don't want to kill them, he says to Krishna. And I'm putting down my bow, I'm sitting down. The better they kill me. And because Arjuna had been searching in the Vedic tradition in which he was educated for some justification to do battle, to kill these guys, even though because they were on the wrong side. And he could find none, so he gave up. And Krishna famously said to him in the Bhagavad Gita, Traigunya Vasaya Veda, Nistraigunya Bhav Arjuna. The Veda's concern is with the three gunas. As for you, be without the three gunas. Try to transcend them. There is no answer in a situation like this on the level of good, bad, or indifferent. There's no answer there. Nistraigunya Bhav Arjuna. And then it says, Nirvanvo Nitya Sattva Sto. That will establish you in true sattva or balance. So the three gunas are sattva or balance, purity, rajas, activity, could also be anger and forcefulness. And tamas would be dullness, inertia, leaning towards death. All those three gunas are in everything, but in different predominance. It's not like a person just becomes purely sattvic. And the Bhagavad Gita presents a situation in which, like, none of those gunas, there is no sattva for Arjuna in that situation. None. And therefore, that's why it's about transcending the three gunas. Traigunya Vasaya Veda. That's the whole concern of the Vedas, says Krishna. You have to be without them. You have to go beyond the Vedas. There is no, see, that's what makes the Gita one of the most exquisite scriptures in the world. Now, Gandhi, it's okay to just stop me if I, Gandhi wanted to interpret sattva out of the Gita. He wanted to turn the whole thing into an allegory and say, you should practice nonviolence. See, and that's where people like Aurobindo, for instance, says, he was in jail at the time, and Aurobindo's disciples came to him and says, Gandhi says the only way to change Hitler's heart is through nonviolence. And Aurobindo says, the only way to change Hitler's heart is to bomb it out of existence. Gandhi's trying to apply a spiritual principle to politics. And he says, then don't work that way. What were you talking about?
We're talking about the gunas, and then you worked into
so
Bhagavad Gita. But the gunas, the elements, the doshas, and it's quite a complex body of knowledge.
All integrated.
And
it was really rich for me because I was, I have a degree in religious studies, particularly the Vedas and the Puranic tradition of India before I went into Ayurveda. All of these stories are interrelated or source stories, the metaphors, the lessons, the events, the names, the people, the dynamics are all play a role, not just in Bhagavad Gita, religious studies, but in Ayurveda as well. You look at the different, is it okay to go into this? You just stop me, because, if I go off. For people who have heard about the Bhagavad Gita, there were five brothers, Yudhishthir and Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva. There were these five. How did they come to be, these five brothers around which the Mahabharata centers their fate, predominantly with Arjuna and Krishna? This is a long story, though.
Well, we won't get. I mean,
I want to tell her, but I don't want. I want it to be valuable for people. So,
well, I mean, we could do it next time. We don't have to squeeze it into the hour because it's coming up on.
Well, then let's stay with Ayurveda. let's stay with Ayurveda. So the main thing that I experience as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I have rarely seen a person who came to me without an identifiable causative factor that is within their control to change. But almost all the people who have come to me don't have the vidya, the knowledge of what to do. I was one of them. I first went to an Ayurvedic practitioner. I had a big business, I had 25 people working for me, and I had an architectural woodworking company. And I had well, I thought it was a heart attack. This is like 20, I'm terrible with dates, a long time ago. And I couldn't work. And so, I didn't want to go to the Western approach where they wanted to do surgery or put a camera into my vein, look around in the heart. So I was stuck, and a friend of mine came to me and said, Peter, you're a Vedic scholar. What about Ayurveda? And so I thought, well, I never studied that aspect of the Vedic tradition. So I went to a Vedic practitioner, Ayurvedic practitioner. She was living at Mount Madonna in Santa Cruz, a woman. And she did my pulse. She said, oh, you have really high pitta. And I said, well, what's that mean? And she said, well, too much of the fire element. And I said, so what should I do? And she says, well, you have to lessen the intake of fire aggravating foods. I said, for instance, and she says, well, for instance, no tomatoes. No tomatoes. I had 10 different kinds of tomatoes growing in my yard. No tomatoes. I said, what else? She says, well, no acidic fruits. I loved acidic fruits. The single most amazing thing I've learned as an Ayurvedic practitioner is that people are addicted exactly to the things they shouldn't have. It's just amazing. It's like when I first started practicing in San Francisco, I would ask people, can I go into your cupboards and your refrigerator? Because I didn't have an office, and I would go to people's houses. And they would, sure. And I'd look and see, what they had, a bunch of cheese, whatever they had in their cupboards. And I would say, this is probably what's going on with you. It was like a magic trick. I mean, I had also observed them. I had seen them.
Right.
And, it was like a magic trick. The single most amazing thing I've learned and observed is that people are addicted exactly to the things they shouldn't have. Vatas come in. They're really into raw foods. That's the worst for you. My parents, I was brought up a raw foodist. It worked great when I was in my coffee years, but as I got older, it wasn't good. And when they came to live with me, when they got old in Sonoma, I had a house in Sonoma, I took them off of raw foods. I said, no more for you. Not in your Vata years. And they love me and they listen. Go ahead. You got a question?
Well, I mean, we could go on, and I really do want to take the moment here to thank you very much. I don't want to close it off right now, but I would like to invite you to have another discussion, and maybe we could focus in on a couple of things because people are experiencing, and I would like to get contemporary with some of the plagues of the viruses and the pandemics, whatever you want to say about the COVID world.
Let me interrupt you there. Excuse me, Ed, but this is really interesting. In the old Ayurvedic texts, pandemics occur when the government were there. They talked about it as the Raja, the king, is corrupt. The pandemic occurred during the time of Trump and is still lingering. And we had also at its prodromal or earlier symptoms. That's when it occurred. That doesn't mean that Trump is causative of that necessarily, but it means it's correlative of that. Sorry to interrupt you. I just didn't want to forget that.
No, I think that's important because all of these expressions of our time and the gestalt, if you will, are not, just happening on their own as somebody who's got these illnesses. I mean, you look to the refrigerator. If you look for the moment of, world crises, and now we're in a global world, you would look into the refrigerator of the operating principles of politics or government or military. these old ways of handling ancient problems that are still operating and now getting to be global conflicts instead of tribal issues. And you could probably take it from the individual to the community to the state to the nation to the world. I mean, they're all springing out of a similar biological world we all live in.
Or I should say, and you need not only look to the refrigerator, so to speak, using that symbolically, but you also look out into the stars. We happen to live in a time that is called the Kali Yuga. Again, we're dealing with time here. And imagine there's a grand center of the universe. And then in a big elliptical, I should do it like this to the camera, in a big elliptical, not circular, but elliptical arc, we are circling, our galaxy is circling around this grand center of the universe. When we are closest to the grand center of the universe, that's called the Sat Yuga, the age of purity, the age of Dharma, when the cow of Dharma stands on 4 legs, when things are benign all through the world. And when, then there's the Treta Yuga, the Dwarpa Yuga, there's different yugas, but when you're furthest away, when our galaxy is furthest away from the grand center of the universe in this big elliptical arc, that's called the Kali Yuga. And we are in, according to most, there's a few exceptions like Yukteswar and Yogananda's teacher. There's a few exceptions, but people, that we are in the Kali Yuga. And that this is that doesn't mean that everybody has to be dark and depressed, but it means in terms of the world and the qualities, the cow of Dharma, of righteousness, only stands on 1 leg in this period. You can see that it's real evident recently, with Trump. I mean, there's 0 Dharma. I mean, it's just it's adharma all the way, all the time. And so that doesn't mean that we can't have a community or create a situation in which Dharma exists, but it means that the general weather period of time in which we exist is dark and it's not as supportive as in the Sat Yuga, when we're closest to the grand center of the universe. All the qualities of life get degraded. So on that happy note, I want to wish everybody a happy birthday.
Well, it's a transformative note because I'm the Oppenheimer movie. Did you take a look at that?
Of course, I'm writing a paper that was inspired by that. Absolutely.
Yeah, the quote that he makes when he saw the aftermath, if you will, of the atomic explosion. And the actual quote that I went and looked into that he referred to when he said, Shiva, I've become the Lord of Death.
Now I'm become death, the destroyer of the world.
And what you're referring to, when I went back to the quote, and it actually says, I am time, the cause of world destruction, mighty, come here to annihilate all worlds. So it's time, as you referred to in the beginning of the conversation, but it's also the challenge of this moment. We're in a transformative period here of great significance, as you're pointing to, not only in health, but in all aspects of the stars, as you're referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to. I have so much to say about that, but
I know. Well, let's just end it now because we're coming up on the hour, and
Good.
People's time and attention.
I hope this has been valuable. I hope it has helped people start to consider their own health, which is something that we can do karma, we can change.
Okay, well, I'm going to post this week, and then comments will come, and we'll respond to the comments. So the people who are still with us, watching and listening, I encourage you to post comments underneath the video, and we will follow up on your questions and go further with this.
So be it. I'm happy to do it, Ed.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Good. Okay. Good to see you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.